In this lesson, we are going to continue with solving equations using inverse operations. We're going to add a few extra things to it. In these first ones here, we do not have equations. We just have expressions. Notice there are no equal signs. The purpose of these two questions is to refresh our memory what to do when we have parentheses. So if you have parentheses or brackets, you have to take the number that is in front of them, and we use the distributive property, and we multiply it to all terms within the bracket. So 4 times 5x gives us 20x. 4 times 5 is 20, and we have the x. 4 times 1 is just 4, so we have plus 4. So we would get 20x plus 4, and we would have simplified that expression. In the second one, negative 3 times 2x will give us negative 6x. Negative 3 times negative 5 gives us plus 15. So we use what's called the distributive property. So now we want to solve the following. So solve means find the value of the variable. When you have parentheses, again, there's more than one way that you may want to attack this question. But one of the common ways that people will solve it is by first of all distributing through the bracket. It's not the only way, but it's a common way. So we're going to distribute this 3 through the bracket. We're going to get 3n plus 6 equals negative 18. So now we want to solve for n. We want to find what value satisfies that so that the left-hand side equals the right-hand side. Using inverse operations, we need to remove that positive 6. We want to be adding and subtracting 0. Inverse of addition is subtraction, so I need to subtract 6 from both sides. So I'll have 3n, 6 minus 6 is 0, equals negative 18 subtract 6 is negative 24. When you have negative values and you're adding them together, make very sure that you are doing it correctly. Integer addition with negative numbers is one of the places that people will often make mistakes. So be very careful with your signs. So now we have 3n equals negative 24. 3n means 3 times n, and the inverse of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. So 3 divided by 3 is just 1. So we have 1n, or just n. Negative 24 divided by 3 is negative 8. So our value is n equals negative 8. So let's look at the next one. The variables are on the opposite side, not a big deal. Distribute the 4 through the bracket. We're going to get 4a minus 4 times negative 2.3 would be 9.2. So 4a subtract 9.2. So again, we're solving for a. We want to have it so that it's adding 0. So we need to remove that negative 9.2. Inverse of subtract is addition. So we're going to add 9.2. So negative 3.2 plus 9.2 will give us 6 equals 4a. So 4a means multiplication. Inverse of multiplication is division. So we need to divide both sides by 4. 6 divided by 4 gives us 1.5. 4 divided by 4 gives us 1, so we just have a. And there is the value of a. So with parentheses, it's really just one additional step to what we were doing in the previous lesson. Expand. Use the distributive property to get rid of the brackets, and then use your inverse operations to solve for the variable. When we have the variable in the denominator, this often really confuses people. It's not a common thing that you will see at this level, but we do need to understand what needs to happen. So 6 divided by x equals 3. This here is called a restriction. When x is in the bottom of a fraction, it means we're dividing by x. X cannot equal 0 because you can't divide by 0. It's impossible. You will get an error if you try to do it on your calculator. You cannot divide by 0. So we just write that down as a restriction. Doesn't really affect how we're going to solve for x. Now what a lot of people want to do here is they say, okay, the inverse of division is multiplication, so I need to multiply, which you are absolutely correct. However, people will multiply by 6. It's not what we want to do. We need to multiply by the value that is in the denominator, the bottom of the fraction. That's what we need to get rid of, because ultimately we want to be dividing by the same number, so they cancel out and become 1. So what we have to do here is we have to multiply by x. We multiply by the value that's in the denominator. X divided by x is 1. 1 times 6 is 6. On the right-hand side, 3 times x is 3x. Now what we can do, we have a 3 times x, so the inverse of multiplication is division. So now we divide by 3 to get the x by itself. 6 divided by 3 is 2. 3 divided by 3 is 1. So we're left with 2 equals x. That should make sense. If we go back to the original equation and we verify it, that should make sense. Because what we're saying is 6 divided by some number. We're saying the number 2 is going to give us 3. And that is the case. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So left-hand side equals right-hand side. So this is a tough one. When the variable is in the denominator, you need to remember that we're going to multiply both sides by the variable, because you want to multiply by what was in the denominator. That's the inverse process that we're trying to solve for. So the last two questions here do deal with some fractions, but notice the fractions are not in with the variable. They're separate. All right, so there's more than one way we can do this. If you like working with fractions, then we can simply subtract 9/5 from both sides. You can find your common denominator, go from there. If you do not like working with fractions, we can get rid of the fraction right off the bat. And it's a process that can work. It's not the only way, but it's a process that will work. So if you don't like working with fractions, let's get rid of the fraction. We want to get rid of this 5. That's what's making it a fraction. So to get rid of that 5, we need to multiply, because that's the inverse of dividing. But the key is we have to multiply every single term. All right? We can't just do it on the one side part on the left-hand side and then on the right-hand side, because we haven't isolated a single term yet. So if you're going to get rid of the fraction, you must multiply it to every single term. So now we're going to have 5 times 2y is 10y. 5 divided by 5 is just 1. So we have plus 9, because 1 times 9 is 9. Negative 7 times 5 is negative 35. No fractions. A much easier problem to solve. So we want to have that we're adding 0. So the inverse of plus 9 is negative 9. So we are going to subtract 9 from both sides. Leave us with 10y. 9 subtract 9 is 0. Negative 35 subtract 9 is negative 44. So that now 10 times y. Inverse of multiplication is division. Divide both sides by 10. 10 divided by 10 is 1, so we're left with y. Negative 44 divided by 10 is negative 4.4. There's your answer. So if you don't like fractions, what you want to do is we want to get rid of the fraction. Now if we look at the second one, it's not as easy because there are two fractions and they are two different denominators. But here's what you can do. I'm actually going to rewrite this question so that I'm spaced it out and have a little more room to write. Find a common denominator for 5 and 3. And if you don't, it doesn't have to be the lowest. The lower the number, the easier your work is, but it doesn't have to be. Find a common denominator of 5 and 3. So the easiest way to do that is 5 times 3 is 15. So now I'm going to multiply every single term by 15. This is going to get rid of the fraction. Here's how. 15 divided by 5 is 3. All right, remember we were multiplying, so now we can divide it out. 15 divided by 5 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. Here we just have 15 times 3. There was no fraction there, so it's just a straight multiplication. 45x equals 15 divided by 3 is 5. 11 times 5 is 55. The fractions are gone. This works if you find a common denominator. So if you didn't find a common denominator, let's say you picked 20. 20 will divide by 5, but it will not divide by 3. So your goal is to get rid of the fraction by not having a decimal value left. So you want to make sure that that number will divide both denominators evenly. So from this point, we need to isolate the x. Now this type of a question actually confuses people. 6 minus 45x. I see so many students want to add 45. The 45 is with the x. It's being multiplied. It's the 6 that we need to move. What is the sign with the 6? It's a positive. Right now that's a plus 6. We want to make it a 0. We need to subtract 6 from both sides. All right, we are not adding 6. This negative sign confuses people. You want to look at the sign to the left of the number that we are going to move. So now, 6 subtract 6 is 0. So we are left with negative 45x equals 49. 55 minus 6 is 49. We have a negative 45 times x. Inverse of multiplication is division. So we're going to divide both sides by negative 45. X equals. Now if we divide 49 by 45, we get negative 1.08, where the 8 is repeating. You could choose to write it like that, or because it's not a nice terminating decimal, we can just leave it as negative 49/45. So either one would be acceptable. So if you have fractions and you don't like working with fractions, eliminate them right off the bat. There are other ways to solve this, and if you would like to know another way, talk to your teacher about it. This is just simply the one that is most common because it gets rid of the fractions and then it's fairly basic from there on in.